Welcome to the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Monday, October 14th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 4-2 after a 32-13 win over the Las Vegas Raiders in Week 6 of the 2024 NFL season at Allegiant Stadium. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to react to Pittsburgh's win and 4-2 start, tell you why a new PFF stat is actually a bad sign for TJ Watt, and propose a few realistic wide receiver trade targets for the Steelers. But first, it's time for Mike Tomlin to rip off the Band-Aid and name Justin Fields the starter. In Week 6, the Steelers scored 30-plus points in a 2-plus score win for just the first time this year. The last time they did it was last year against the Bengals on December 23rd. Besides that, it hadn't happened since 2020. So this is a rarity to score 30 points in a 2-plus score win, a blowout win, if you will. And Alex Kozora had this. 32 points is the most in a Steelers road win since Christmas Day in 2017. That was a 34-6 win over the Houston Texans. And it feels like we should maybe be throwing a parade about the Steelers scoring this many points. This is not something that happens very often, if really ever. And yet there's still a quarterback controversy, and there's still a huge group of the media and of the fan base that wants to see Russell Wilson as the Steelers starting quarterback. And I'm here to say, stop it. I'm not here to say that the Steelers offense is perfect. The reason that they scored 32 points is not because they have an offensive juggernaut. It's because their defense was excellent. It's because their defense forced 3 turnovers. It's because they had a blocked punt. But this offense is good enough, and I'm not sure it could possibly survive without what Justin Fields specifically brings to it. So it's time to name Fields the starter. In Week 6, Fields went 14 for 24 for 145 yards with 3 sacks. He nearly had a turnover on the Warren swing pass, and that was behind the line of scrimmage and came in really hot. It ended up like a fumble that they recovered. It was not a good play. He did not have a great game. He had a negative 3% completion percentage over expectation, which essentially is a good advanced stat way of looking at how accurate you were as a passer relative to the throws you were trying to attempt and the separation of the receivers. He had a 75.9 passer rating, which was worse than his counterpart in the game, Aiden O'Connell, and well over 3-second time to throw at 3.29. And that's something we talk a lot about with Fields, is how quickly is he making these decisions? How quickly is he getting the ball out of his hands? Because there are some bad things that can happen when you hold on to it for too long. I feel like there's an epidemic of quarterbacks in not just the NFL, but especially college football, because my primary function here at Fansided is as a college sports writer, and watching as many college football games as I do, quarterbacks just don't want to accept a sack. And they think in a lot of cases that a sack is the worst possible thing that can happen on a play. I assure you it is not. Ask Will Levis about that. So we want Justin Fields to get the ball out of his hands quicker. He didn't do that in Week 6. Najee Harris essentially carried the offense with 106 yards on the ground, a touchdown on 14 carries. It was Najee's best performance of the season. And just an aside on that, like his best performance, and it wasn't close. He was making defenders miss downfield. The blocking was not great. Obviously, they have a 4th-round rookie at right guard who actually looked pretty good. Zach Frazier at center, who went out with an ankle injury late in the game. That was kind of when the game was sealed up. But Broderick Jones continues to be a complete liability at right tackle. And Dan Moore Jr., for as serviceable as he's been in the pass game, has been not very good in the run game. And Najee just made a lot out of very little on Sunday afternoon in Las Vegas. He created explosive plays, which is not something we've really ever seen from Najee, that long touchdown run. And he got more than what was blocked for. He looked like the 1st-round pick that was promised, and that's rare that we see Najee look like that type of player. I don't believe he is that type of player. I don't believe that's something you can count on going forward. So you need to count on Justin Fields. But Fields was indecisive. He was inaccurate as a passer. He missed plenty of throws. He only went 14 of 24. But this game, which could have been one of his worst as a Steeler, proves exactly why he's the Steelers' only chance on offense and why he needs to remain the starting quarterback and why Mike Tomlin needs to name him the starting quarterback so he can stop looking over his shoulder at Russell Wilson. Fields ran for 59 yards and 2 touchdowns on 11 carries. The offensive line, again, was brutal. Broderick Jones is a huge problem at right tackle. And if you want to know how bad Broderick Jones is and how much worse he is than Dan Moore Jr., who I and everyone was calling for to be benched, just ask Max Crosby about it. He started the game rushing against Dan Moore Jr. and very quickly in the first quarter realized his better chance was on the other side, and he gave Broderick Jones fits all day when he switched sides of the defensive line. Max Crosby dominated that game, and that's why Fields was pressured on 60.6% of his dropbacks. 20 of his 33 dropbacks he was pressured on. On those pressured dropbacks, he went 5 for 12 as a passer for 62 yards. And that's all with the Raiders only blitzing 9 times. They did not need to bring additional bodies to get pressure against this offensive line, and that's only going to get easier for defenses to do if Zach Frazier is out for an extended period of time with that ankle injury. The early reports kind of trickling out from teammates and anyone who can get information seems to be that Frazier's going to be all right and that Frazier was attempting to return to the game and had his ankle taped up, but they didn't need him. Okay, let's hope he's back there next week and beyond because he's playing at a borderline all-pro level in the middle of their offensive line. But that's not going to make this a good offensive line. Seumalo is a good left guard. He's not an elite left guard. And even if he was an elite left guard, that's not going to save this offensive line because they have a major liability at right tackle. They have a mediocre at best left tackle, and they have a 4th-round rookie who's going to experience growing pains at right guard. And that's really the best it's going to be all season because the injury bug has really bitten this offensive line. The Steelers' offense, beyond just those injuries on the offensive line, has massive structural issues at the foundation of what it can be. And that's not the fault of Arthur Smith, though I have faults with his addiction to the pitch plays to Najee Harris, who doesn't really have much speed to get to the edge. And the pitch obviously helps you get to the edge quicker. That's why they're running the pitch instead of the straight outside zone handoff. It's to give Najee more space and more time because he has very poor vision as a one-cut runner in this outside zone system. The pitch should help, but they don't have the wide receivers to block for it. They don't have wide receivers really at all. So that pitch play isn't working except for the one that Najee busted that was not blocked well. And the passing game isn't working very well because there's no wide receiver 2. And the wide receiver 1 only cares about half the time. And we learned that in the Dallas game when he didn't care any of the time. So it's the worst offensive tackle in football at right tackle, a banged up offensive line, and big issues at wide receiver, not to mention who I think is the best running back on the team, not Jaylen Warren, has been injured pretty much all year. He finally came back this week and was involved early, didn't get much going, and we'll see what his involvement is going forward. There just aren't a lot of playmakers on this offense. Van Jefferson is wide receiver 2, and he's 4th on the team in targets, which is very low for a wide receiver 2, though not in an Arthur Smith offense. He doesn't use wide receivers a ton in the passing game, but a wide receiver 2 through 6 weeks who's been healthy with 13 targets and 8 catches for 62 yards means your offense has a problem. Unless that offense has maybe Travis Kelce and George Kittle at tight end, and you're just targeting them left and right, and we know that's not the case. Pat Freiermuth has been very good. There aren't a lot of targets on this offense, and yet, all of that, and yet, the Steelers' offense ranks 13th in the NFL in expected points added per dropback. That's impossibly efficient considering the circumstances, especially when you layer on the conservative nature of the play caller and the head coach who don't want to take deep shots down the field, which if they pay off are going to massively help your EPA, aggressiveness on early downs, aggressiveness in the red zone. All of those things, if Fields executes on them, would help. Regardless of all of that, By expected points added, the Steelers are 13th in the NFL in EPA per quarterback dropback. That's impressive. And it's because Fields has run for 5 touchdowns all in the red zone. He's the clear number one option down there. His legs give this offense an element that it desperately needs because it's not just added efficiency in the red zone. It's not just these designed runs that we've seen pay off when they're used sparingly. It's a get out of jail free card when Broderick Jones, who we know is going to struggle, struggles. It's a get out of jail free card when Dan Moore Jr. looks like Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle, or when your 4th round rookie right guard looks like a 4th round rookie right guard. Justin Fields can still make that into something. Despite those 20 pressure dropbacks yesterday, he was only sacked 3 times. That's a 15% pressure to sack ratio. That's excellent. That's one of his big problems as a quarterback is he takes too many negative plays. And I said he was holding on to the ball too long. It didn't matter yesterday because where he was inaccurate and indecisive as a passer, he was a very decisive runner as a scrambler. So you have to credit this offensive improvement to Justin Fields, but also to Arthur Smith because there are some good numbers for this offense relative to the amount of talent on it. Fields only has 1 interception on the year. He did try to throw another. So they're protecting the ball, and they've also improved the efficiency. The Steelers, compared to this time last year, through 6 weeks, last year at this time, they were 29th in EPA per play. This year, they're 18th. Last year at this time, they were 32nd in success rate. This year, they're 18th. 28th in EPA per dropback and 31st in dropback success rate. This year, 13th and 17th. That's not just an improvement of Justin Fields over Kenny Pickett, which is a massive one. A massive improvement from Justin Fields to Kenny Pickett, but also a massive improvement from Arthur Smith to Matt Canada, even if we're not seeing it in the running game, right? Last year at this time, 28th in rushing EPA and 32nd in success rate. We feel like the running game has been bad this year, right? Arthur Smith was supposed to turn Najee Harris into Derrick Henry. If you somehow believe that, those players are not remotely similar, but other than they're big and they went to Alabama. But they went from 28th and 32nd in success rate to 23rd and 18th. That was through 6 weeks last year, through 6 weeks this year. The run game is even that much better. And that's not just because of Najee Harris looking better or because Arthur Smith is a competent professional. It's also because Justin Fields runs. Justin Fields' rushing ability makes the run game viable. The passing game isn't good, but it wouldn't be good with just about any quarterback aside from Mahomes, Josh Allen. Maybe you can throw in a CJ Stroud. Lamar Jackson would make the offense good. I don't know that Lamar Jackson would even make the passing game good. You need truly, truly special passers to elevate a group led by George Pickens with Van Jefferson at wide receiver 2. So let's stop expecting that from Justin Fields and let's lean into what he is very good at. He's very good at running. And that can build you an efficient offense if you know how to use it. And Arthur Smith has shown that for the most part, while I wish he would use design quarterback run more, he knows how to use Justin Fields' legs, and Justin Fields knows how to use his legs in the NFL. A lot of the yardage yesterday was on scrambles. It wasn't all design stuff. He's decisive with it. He turns sacks into first downs with it. Russell Wilson is not doing that. Russell Wilson may have done that when he was 25. Russell Wilson is not 25. It's been a decade since Russell Wilson was 25. Russell Wilson is an aging quarterback coming off of a calf injury who has not been good in 2 years and who the Denver Broncos are paying $83 million over the next 2 years to play Bo Nix instead of. So stop it. It's time for Mike Tomlin to name Justin Fields his starting quarterback. So Fields can stop looking over his shoulder. And so the Steelers can have the best offense that they're going to have this year. It is never going to be a good offense. And yes, maybe it would be better with an elite franchise quarterback. Justin Fields is not that yet. Maybe he will be. I'm not even sold on that. I'm sold on his legs. Give them a chance, and they would not have one otherwise. So we need to stop doing this. Mark Cabali, who was formerly of The Athletic and is now the Steelers correspondent for the Pat McAfee show, wrote in his post-game column recap that Justin Fields' legs are good, but is it good enough? Is it time to put Russell Wilson on the field? Is it time to make Russell Wilson the starter? And Cabali's been a Fields hater from the beginning with this. And he's been in the Russell Wilson camp. But I don't think we're understanding that this past game has no ceiling. Even if Russell Wilson was Russell Wilson from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I don't think this passing game has very high of a ceiling at all. And especially not with this version of Russell Wilson and his limitations physically and his limitations as a passer, because he is not some statuesque Drew Brees even when he can't run. He's not accurate over the middle of the field. He doesn't want to make those throws. So Cabali was suggesting maybe we do a 2-quarterback system. Stop. Russell Wilson would not improve this offense. Justin Fields' rushing ability is the Steelers' only chance. They need to lean into it. Fields is not a franchise quarterback, but he's more than serviceable right now. And his unique skill set as a rusher, which he is elite at, one of the best, if not the best in the NFL, uniquely suits him to tread water in the Steelers' cesspool of an offense. Arthur Smith needs to do more quarterback run. We need to go all in on this. Getting Fields downhill with his speed at his size is the best option for this offense. We saw Brian Daboll do this with Daniel Jones just a couple of years ago. Daboll's first year in New York, he took the Giants to the playoffs. They won a playoff game against a very fraudulent Minnesota Vikings team. But they won a playoff game because Daboll didn't have any loyalty to Daniel Jones at the time. He was entering the final year of his rookie contract. Exactly the situation the Steelers have with Justin Fields. And they saw that they could run him. They could let him take a few more hits. Right? They could let him be aggressive with his legs because QB run is valuable. It's one of the most valuable plays in football. The reason we don't see guys like RG3 or these or having these long careers is because it introduces the risk of QB injury. Steelers don't have to worry about that. And a player like RG3 was massively limited as a passer, and there are all these other limitations that come with it. But if you have a quarterback who can run at an elite level, you can build a nice floor for an offense. Not a massive ceiling if you don't have the passing game, but you can raise the floor. So the Steelers need to do that. They don't have loyalty to Fields. Run him. See what you can do. See what this offense can be. Because it's clear now that the Steelers are too good to bottom out. If that was going to happen, it would have happened with Kenny Pickett last year. If that was going to happen, it would have happened this week with a ton of injuries on the offense and mounting injuries on the edges of the defense, heading to Las Vegas against kind of an unknown at quarterback in Aiden O'Connell. I mean, obviously he played some last year, but he's a streaky quarterback. He could get hot. He would have been a perfect Mike Tomlin loss candidate, and they blew him out. So this team's too good to bottom out. TJ Watt's not going to let that happen. The defense isn't as dominant as it should be and has suffered those injuries, but you're 4-2 with Justin Fields. You're going to beat the bad teams for the most part, the very bad teams at least. So you can't seriously tell me that this team would be any better than 4-2 with Russell Wilson at quarterback. So then what are we talking about? You think this team was going to start 6-0 if Russell Wilson was in there? The defense is why they lost in Indy. They couldn't stop Joe Flacco. The defense was a big problem against Dallas, even though the offense wasn't good. Mike Tomlin shouldn't just name Justin Fields as starter. That's not the only thing I'm talking about, is just this naming so Fields doesn't have to look over his shoulder, right? He should do everything in his power to empower Justin Fields in this offense and build his confidence. I don't mean for Fields to be throwing 40 times a game, though the Steelers could stand to be more aggressive early in games, not playing for field goals and early downs, not running on second and long as much. But I mostly mean in public, in these press conferences, in private meeting rooms, and in the way they construct this offense to accentuate his best skills. And naming Fields the starter is just the biggest step of that. So let's clear that hurdle, right? I mentioned that college football is my primary focus for Fansided, obviously locked in on the Steelers. This week in college football, Penn State traveled out to USC. If you're a Penn State Steelers fan, you know all about this game. And Penn State does not have many weapons on its offense at all. They're very thin at wide receiver, great running backs, interesting quarterback who is still young and going through some growing pains, had maybe his best, most career-defining late drive, but that's not my point. My point about this Penn State offense is they have a really interesting player in tight end Tyler Warren, 6'6", 250+ pound tight end, who's one of the most athletic players on the field. He was a former high school quarterback. So Andy Kotelnicki, their first-year offensive coordinator, came to Penn State and said, I have this weapon, I'm going to use him. And Tyler Warren has been taking snaps at quarterback. He took a snap at center on a trick play this week. He had 17 catches for 220-some yards for Penn State in their win over USC. And this is not a breakdown of Penn State. This is, think about how empowered a player like Tyler Warren has to feel, knowing his coaching staff and his offensive coordinator has the confidence in him to say, yeah, go take a couple snaps at quarterback, not in garbage time, against USC in the biggest game of the season on the road on CBS when you're down. We trust you to handle the ball in that scenario and throw passes. He's thrown 2 passes this year, one of them a touchdown. That's empowering one of your best players. He has to feel immensely confident to take those snaps and not fumble and not mess those plays up. And that's a coaching staff that believes in that player. The Steelers need to find their version of that with Justin Fields to make him feel the most confident that he can be. We saw this with Tua down in Miami, Tua Tagovailoa, who talked about this when Mike McDaniel replaced Brian Flores. And this offseason, Tua ripped Brian Flores for his treatment of him. And on one hand, if your quarterback can't take hard coaching and still remain confident, he may not be cut out for the NFL. I'm totally open to that argument and see the merit of it. This is an insanely hard job. If you don't have the self-belief it takes on your own, then you're probably not ever going to cut it. On the other hand, why present additional adversity to one of your organization's most valuable assets? And even if the Steelers aren't tied into Justin Fields long-term, your quarterback is one of your organization's most valuable assets. In a lot of cases, it's because the job security of the head coach is tied to the success of the quarterback. And a lot of head coaches only get one quarterback. If Flores doesn't believe in his heart that Tua can be a franchise quarterback, he has to try to distance himself from Tua, so the organization will pick him over the quarterback when the quarterback fails. Right? There are other reasons that Brian Flores was fired. There were lawsuits about it. But Flores versus Tua was the decision that the ownership group in Miami and their owner had to make. Who do we believe in? Do we believe there's more in this quarterback, or do we believe the head coach who says no, there isn't? So then they went to Mike McDaniel, who went all in on Tua and rebuilt his confidence, We've seen all the clips of him saying, I love you and you're great on the sideline. And that's turned Tua into one of the most efficient regular season quarterbacks in the NFL. Built his confidence and maximized his abilities. Mike McDaniel's play calling helps in that as well. He built the perfect offense for Tua's strengths. The Steelers don't have that type of innovator. Now, I'm not sure that McDaniel has another pitch beyond what he did last season with that offense, but you can do a version of that with Justin Fields and not risk your job if you're Mike Tomlin. You can go all in on this guy on this offense that has very little talent and say, okay, we're going to run you. We're going to play to your strengths. We're going to let you decide our fate in a lot of ways on offense while we still have a great defense. We're not going to take unneeded chances, right? We're not going to overextend ourselves to where you are turning the ball over, where those bad habits are coming back. But we're going to say, we believe in you as our quarterback. So let's stick with you. Let's build around this. And the Steelers can do that. They should do that. Mike Tomlin should do that because his maximum job security is unmatched in the world of sports. Bill Belichick got fired. Bill Belichick, 6 Super Bowls with the New England Patriots. He got fired. Mike Tomlin will never. He has not won a playoff game since 2016. He will not get fired. Yet he doesn't use that security to take a chance empowering a young quarterback, right? He doesn't use that security to his advantage. Privately, publicly, and on the field, he can believe in Fields and throw his weight behind Fields to see what the best version of him looks like. Maybe that's this, but I don't believe it. I don't believe we're doing the amount of quarterback run that the Steelers should. I don't believe that they're being as aggressive as they should be at times on offense. And I don't believe that a quarterback who's constantly looking over his shoulder at a potential future Hall of Famer who's won a Super Bowl is a good thing. So let's take that out of the equation. Because if you're Mike Tomlin and you do this and you pick Justin Fields and it doesn't pan out, no harm done. If you maximize his abilities and he continues to develop and take more steps and his confidence builds and this team keeps winning games, you just might have something. And by something, I mean a capable bridge quarterback or even maybe a franchise guy. Regardless, if Fields is here for 12 more weeks or 12 more years, you're Mike Tomlin, you're coaching in Pittsburgh as long as you want to, as long as you're still up for the job. So stop this charade of a quarterback controversy. Give Fields the reins. Let's see what he can do the rest of the season. I'm ready for that. As we transition, I need a little drink of water. My voice, maybe not 100%. Russell Wilson, not 100% starting this season. I'm not 100% today. The voice is a little bit hoarse. Went to the Billie Eilish concert last night in Pittsburgh. An amazing experience. Absolutely incredible. If you're a Steelers fan in a different city and she's coming to your city, I'm sure it's probably sold out, but you should absolutely go. The voice isn't 100%, so we need a drink. Take a break for a drink of water. Before we jump into a new PFF stat, that's not a badge of honor for TJ Watt or for the Steelers defense, and especially not for the Steelers coaching staff. So, largely due to the backlash that Steelers fans give to PFF, and maybe you're mad that I'm even uttering those 3 letters, but it's a very helpful tool. Not the grades. I'm not a huge grade guy. I barely ever look at them. The premium stats are very helpful. The tracking stats are very helpful. It's a useful platform from that perspective. But they invented a new stat, and it's chip rate. And they've been posting about it some throughout the season. And TJ Watt is number one with a bullet. They got tired of Steelers fans complaining about how Myles Garrett outpaces Watt in pass rush win rate, right? In pressures, in fake sacks and things instead of real sacks, and in double team rate, because that's a big reason that people valued Myles Garrett's numbers in pressure and win rate over TJ Watt's last year, even though Watt led the NFL in sacks and then didn't win Defensive Player of the Year. So they invented chip rate, and Watt leads by a mile. How often is a pass rusher getting chipped by a tight end, by a running back? Not a true double team, but a chip. Through week 5, Watt was leading the NFL. They haven't updated it yet through week 6 as the numbers still come in. He was chipped a ton by the Raiders, as he is every week. He has constant traffic to try to navigate through. And that's why this year he's actually had more of an impact in the run game than he has as a pass rusher, even though he has 5 sacks. So Watt, through 5 weeks, at 35.9% chip rate on 156 pass rush snaps. That's insanely high. We don't have a ton of data on this, but what we do says that's insanely high. Myles Garrett is number 2 at 23.13%, and only 3 players are above 20%. TJ Watt is over 35%. Those 3 players are TJ Watt, Myles Garrett, and Rashawn Gary of the Green Bay Packers. Now, that may sound like I'm bragging about the Steelers' best player. TJ Watt still has 5 sacks. He's getting chipped on over a third of his pass rush snaps. That's incredible. This is a bad thing. This is not a good thing. This is not a badge of honor. Those of you on Twitter acting like it is, acting like this is vindication for TJ Watt against Myles Garrett in this weird Twitter rivalry of the best defensive player in the NFL. This is not a good thing. It maybe makes TJ Watt's numbers slightly more impressive. It is a really bad thing for the Steelers defense and damning of their defensive coaching staff. You do not have to let your best pass rusher get chipped on 35% of his pass rush snaps. 331 of TJ Watt's 333 snaps through 6 weeks have come from the left edge. If an offensive coaching staff knows where your defense's best pass rusher is going to be on every play, they can develop a plan for slowing him down. Now, that's a big reason why Alex Highsmith or Nick Herbig on the other side have been successful and why Bud Dupree was successful with TJ Watt, right? The Steelers have a philosophy to this thing. They have TJ on the left side, somebody else on the right. That's not changing. But it allows offenses to game plan for TJ Watt and minimize his impact on the game. Watt is 7th in the league with 5 sacks, but he's 48th in the league in pressures. And we may act like that doesn't matter, right? Almost sacking the quarterback is not as good as sacking the quarterback. Getting pressure is still very important. It impacts the quarterback's ability to do his job. It forces mistakes, forces turnovers, forces incompletions. It is valuable. Not as valuable as the actual negative play, but it is valuable. And Watt is 48th in the league. He should be much higher, but he's not. Because offenses know where he's going to be. With Herbig and Highsmith injured, now more than ever, the Steelers need to get creative with their pass rush plan for TJ Watt. Move him all over the defensive line. Have him rushing from the right side, from the interior. Pick on the worst offensive lineman on the other team like Max Crosby did against Broderick Jones. Have him up the middle as a Mike linebacker over the top of the center. That'll terrify an opposing center. If he has to pay attention to Hayward and Watt right behind him standing up, right? It's not an every down thing, but it's a look you show. Stack two edges on the same side, right? When Herbig or Highsmith get healthy, put them with Watt, or do it now with Moon and run some type of stunt with Hayward and Watt. Find ways to let TJ impact the game, because when he can and when there isn't traffic, he's the best defensive player in football. Football, in my mind, is, and a lot of minds and ways it's been explained, is a game of resource allocation on the macro. You're a general manager, you're building a team, you spend a lot on the defensive line on players like Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, TJ Watt especially, Alex Highsmith. So then your coach doesn't have to allocate more blitzers to get pressure on the quarterback, more bodies. So you're paying for it in the salary cap with a higher percentage of the salary cap, so you don't have to allocate those resources on game day and expose your secondary potentially. If you're investing less in the secondary than you are on the defensive line, that allows you, with those more talented defensive linemen who can win with 4-on-5 or whatever, to drop more players into coverage. Right? That's the balance of the resource allocation on defense. Very simplified. So the thought is that you're paying TJ Watt to win, and he does win enough, even with the chips and the double teams. So you don't need the scheme investment with more blitzers. The problem with that theory is that creativity is an unlimited resource. There's no salary cap on creativity. You don't need to bring more blitzers every play. Just be creative with who you bring, when they come, and where they come from. The lack of creativity on the defense is why the Steelers, who rush TJ Watt from the same side every down and play a lot of cover 3, have the most expensive defense, and almost certainly one of the most talented defense in the NFL, and yet they continually get underwhelming results. They're paying a premium on that side of the football to cover up for their defensive-minded head coach's lack of ideas. That's a big problem. It's not a badge of honor. And lastly, before I send you off, and I know this week I'm not so much breaking down plays of the specific game. I don't know that beating the Raiders this badly warrants that. The Steelers needed a win. Coming off of back-to-back losses, they got to win. The defense forced turnovers. They were good on special teams. Chris Boswell was amazing as a kicker. Justin Fields, valuable as a runner in the red zone. Right? This week was a zoom out macro look at this thing at 4-2, because I'm not going to parse through every snap of beating Aiden O'Connell and a Raiders defense that didn't have Christian Wilkins and was very undermanned and maybe one of the worst teams in the NFL. It's a good thing you're beating the worst teams in the NFL. I'm very happy that you're doing that. It gives me confidence that you're not going to completely bottom out, which was not a fear that I had, but was a potential direction for the organization. Okay, this year is not going to be the year. We have a tough back end of the schedule. Maybe we sell off a couple of ancillary pieces, try to bottom out a little bit, build for next year. They still don't have the quarterback to go all in, but clearly that's not going to be the direction, because you beat a team like the Raiders. That gives me confidence. You can at least split against the 2 New York teams coming in. It would be great if you could beat both of them. The New York Jets next week on Sunday Night Football, and Aaron Rodgers coming off a short week because they play tonight. And then the Giants on Monday Night Football after that, leading into the bye week. Then things get very tough. You're in a good spot at 4-2. It's not a great spot. You're not leading the division anymore. The Ravens are, but it's a good spot. So let's take a look at how you could make it slightly better without mortgaging the future. You're still trying to do this dance of now and later, which doesn't always work. I think eventually in the NFL and in any sport, you have to go all in or all out. When you have a defense this good, when you have TJ Watt playing this well, you have to be closer to in than out. You don't have the quarterback to go all the way in, but you got to be closer to in than out. The latest reporting is now saying that Davante Adams could possibly be staying in Las Vegas. And part of that is because he seems to like Aiden O'Connell potentially more than Gardner Minshew, which I'm not sure how that makes much sense. Crazy for Davante Adams. Maybe he was just too spoiled playing with Aaron Rodgers for his entire career that he's hitched his wagon to Derek Carr and now is like, I see something in this Aiden O'Connell who's not terrible, but is a backup, probably at best, and is maybe interested in teaming up with Derek Carr again in New Orleans. Obviously, they played together at Fresno State in college, but Derek Carr is not exactly my idea of a wagon I would want to hitch myself to if I were a superstar receiver on the back nine of my career at age 32. Regardless, potentially he stays. I'm still dubious, if he doesn't, of the Steelers trading for Adams. Even if the salary is one you can get off of next year, and there are, as the cap gurus dig into this contract, there are some outs in it if you want them, right? It's not overwhelming on the salary cap. It's possible for teams to trade for Davante Adams, and you'd probably eventually have to pay him going forward. I'm not sure that's the answer. I'm not sure an aging receiver like that is who I want to tie cap space up into. I didn't want to make the Brandon Ayuk trade this offseason, even though they desperately needed a wide receiver too, because I wasn't sure about the quarterback situation. I'm still unsure about the quarterback situation. I'm more sure than ever it should be Justin Fields over Russell Wilson. I'm unsure of what that means in the landscape of the NFL if you have Justin Fields, even the best version. I'm not certain that's a franchise quarterback. So I don't want to go all in on these receivers and tie up salary cap space that can be used to acquire that quarterback or to give up draft capital that could be used to acquire that quarterback. That's the most important thing. I could talk myself into it a little bit better because I talked last week about wanting to move off of George Pickens. And if you're not going to have to pay George Pickens, I worry a lot less about paying two wide receivers. So there are some big name wide receivers potentially on the market. If you choose one of them to be your wide receiver one, and that includes moving off of Pickens either this year, after this year, at some point, or just letting him walk instead of giving him a contract extension after his rookie deal ends next year, okay. I can get behind that more than I could when the thought process was trade for Ayuk, pay him, then you pay Pickens too. You're really tied up into wide receiver at that point. So I could talk myself into it. I don't think it should be the number one priority, trading for Davante Adams. I don't see the team ceiling changing that much if you do. The other potential options out there that are being floated and more will continue to be, we're still a little while away from the trade deadline on November 4th. Christian Kirk from the Jaguars, a good player, would be an upgrade, even though he's not playing as well as he did when he first got to Jacksonville. No one's playing very well in Jacksonville this year. That's why they'd be potentially willing to move off of a player like Kirk. The problem there is you're looking at another primary slot. He can win on the outside. He can play on the outside. You're looking at a primary slot guy on an offense that has a lot of those. Van Jefferson's best in the slot. Roman Wilson's best in the slot. Calvin Austin's best in the slot. Christian Kirk, probably not a fit. You need somebody that can win on the outside, especially if you plan on giving up on George Pickens at some point. And it doesn't seem like the Steelers do. He played the most snaps of any wide receiver against the Raiders and played mostly all of them until garbage time at the end of the game. And in garbage time at the end of the game, they were feeding him some targets because the squeaky wheel apparently gets the grease, even though they were attempting to potentially bench him last week. So Tomlin, again, giving in to his diva wide receivers as he did with Antonio Brown for so long and with Chase Claypool until they moved on from him and with others, with Deontay Johnson when he wasn't blocking, and now George Pickens. Christian Kirk, probably not a good option. DeAndre Hopkins for the Titans, 1 year left, 32 years old, void year next year. So you can figure out the contract, and it's not a massive one. There's some redundancy there with George Pickens. Neither is a separator. Hopkins, one of the best all time as a late separator, right? Winning at the catch point. So you're building a bit of a redundant group, but a massive upgrade. So, okay, I could be into it. I don't think it greatly changes things, but it could make you much more competent. Another name floated, DK Metcalf of the Seahawks. This is a recent thing, probably leaning too heavily on his frustration from Thursday Night Football. 1 year left on his deal, gonna want another big contract. I don't think he's actually getting traded. And you'd have to pay him if you did, but I'd be more into paying DK Metcalf, much younger, than Devontae Adams. And I could still reason the same thing, saying, okay, we can move on from George Pickens. So if that's remotely possible, there's more interest, but not at the draft capital you're going to have to give up, likely a one, maybe multiple ones. And I don't think he's going to get traded. Then there's a guy like Kendrick Bourne. We're going way down the ladder. Kendrick Bourne of the Patriots, coming off a torn ACL. He's played 2 games this year. Tore it midseason last year. 2 catches for 9 yards yesterday against the Texans. He played in an outside zone running system in San Francisco. Played pretty well in San Francisco. That's why he got a deal in New England. He could at least be serviceable as a blocker on the outside, more so than what they have, because their undersized group, and Van Jefferson specifically, have been very bad blocking on the outside. So Arthur Smith's pitch addiction, which I understand in how it helps Najee Harris get his eyes up, because he does not have great vision, and that's a reason the outside zone one-cut stuff doesn't work as well with Najee. He also doesn't have great speed to get to the edge. The pitch kind of expedites both of those things. He's to the edge quicker, and he has his eyes up quicker. So that's why they're going to keep running this, but you need wide receivers who can block it. Maybe Kendrick Bourne could be that. I don't think it's a perfect fit. And that's sounding kind of concerning, right? Because those are some of the bigger names on the market, and maybe none of them are perfect for the Steelers unless you want to really give something up for Devontae Adams. And maybe he's not even going anywhere. My favorite options, there are 2. He's on the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns have a complete shit show on their hands for the 100th time. This one worse than most. Deshaun Watson is the worst quarterback of this millennium by all advanced numbers this season. Austin Gale of The Ringer, I believe, had the number of total EPA through the first 6 weeks of the season of quarterbacks since 2000, and Deshaun Watson was the worst. And it's a good metric because second worst was Jamarcus Russell. So they're identifying the worst quarterbacks, and Deshaun Watson's been that bad. Amari Cooper, not happy playing with a quarterback that bad. Amari Cooper still has quite a bit of juice left. This season, he's only caught 24 of his 53 targets for 250 yards, 2 touchdowns. Not a very big play threat. His longest reception, 24 yards against the Giants. I'm not going to put a lot of that on Amari Cooper. Maybe he's lost a half step since he was one of the best receivers in the NFL. He certainly hasn't been that in Cleveland, but he's been good, especially with Joe Flacco last year. So when it's not Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper's been a lot better. I'd be very interested in his skill set on this offense and funneling more targets to a guy like Cooper if you could pry him away from Cleveland. He's a guy they'd be interested in trading. This is a lost season. But who knows how that owner and that front office is going to be reacting to anything at this point with what Deshaun Watson is alleged of doing and likely did, and how poorly he's playing. Pile those things on each other after the organization went completely bananas all in for this player. You're not going to have them operating rationally about that. So potentially they could say trading our best receiver to the Pittsburgh Steelers is something we are absolutely not going to do. So possibly the best option on the trade market for the Steelers, in my opinion, might be a no-go. Or maybe they'll say, we're throwing our hands up. This is already a disaster. What's one more log on the fire? What's going to be the difference if we trade Cooper to the Steelers and he beats us in the second half of the season when they play twice? Who cares? Because we've already given a fully guaranteed contract to an incredibly bad quarterback and an incredibly bad person that the fan base has no interest in cheering for. So who knows? It could be on the table. That's who I would want Omar Khan to go after, because you can likely get him for a mid-round pick. It's not a long-term investment. You don't have to pay him an extension, right? This is essentially an expiring contract, one void year left. You could pay him if he pans out and plays very well. He could be your option going forward. You don't have to wait into free agency or highly prioritize the position in the draft, or as highly prioritize it in the draft this offseason. If it works out, you get a little trial run. Maybe you pay a fourth or a third round pick for it. Maybe if it's a future second, because the Steelers have to pay a bit of a premium for an in-division trade. I'd be interested in that. The future second would scare me a little bit, but if it's a third, fourth, even a fifth, because who knows, the price is usually a lot lower for these players with in-season trades than we're expecting, except for the superstars. And then probably the most realistic possible option based on fit, based on willingness to make a deal, is Darius Slayton of the Giants on an expiring contract. They have Malik Neighbors. He's their wide receiver one. Darius Slayton has been good for the Giants his entire career. And his entire career, the Giants have been looking for wide receivers to replace Darius Slayton. He doesn't have a 1,000-yard season, but he has seasons of 740, 751, 724, 770 yards. His rookie year, he had 740 yards and 8 touchdowns. He's a big play threat. For his career, he's averaging 15 yards a catch. He's not a great number one bona fide or even a great number two option. He's an upgrade over what they got, and he could be had. So I said realistic wide receiver trade options. Okay, here's probably our most realistic, our most attainable. If Malik Neighbors comes back healthy from his concussion he's dealing with, the Giants are already funneling all of the targets in that offense to him. The Giants are already looking to the future because they don't believe in Daniel Jones. They would be happy to get a draft pick, a fourth, a fifth, maybe even a sixth, for a wide receiver on an expiring contract. And the Steelers should absolutely be interested in doing that. Not because it turns this team into a Super Bowl contender, but because it helps you more effectively evaluate what you have in Justin Fields. I do not want this team to go all in on the current roster construction. This team cannot win a Super Bowl. It probably can't win a playoff game. But it gets a little closer to that with a viable wide receiver too, and you get your answer a little bit easier with less excuses about Justin Fields if you make that trade. So that's a trade I'd be very interested in doing. And that's probably my favorite possible wide receiver trade target for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Next week, The Steelers have the Jets, and Aaron Rodgers will get to see the Jets on Monday Night Football. That's one the Steelers have got to win if they want to be a playoff team. I think that's a big test because the Jets are not a very good team. The Jets fired their head coach in season. The Jets are being run by a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers, but the Jets still have Aaron Rodgers. And we saw that Dak Prescott was enough to beat the Steelers, even with some red zone turnovers. Maybe Aaron Rodgers is enough to beat the Steelers too. So that's one that scares me. The Steelers are 2.5-point favorites heading into it. Very slight favorites against the Jets. We'll have all week to talk about it. We'll have the Wednesday show, of course, with Tommy Jagai and Shane Kubis. Be there to check that out. And as always, check out everything on stillcurtain.com. If you're a big fan of the Steelers, if you're a fan of this show, be sure to subscribe to Still Curtain on YouTube. We really appreciate your support. I'll talk to you next Monday. And until then, have a great week and go Steelers.